So today, myself, Katie Gerberick, Jordan Crispbaum, Michaela Elwood, and Jamie Johnson will be presenting on viruses. The stage of phage and virus infection, the first step is attachment, the second is penetration, the third is biosynthesis, the fourth is assembly or maturation, and the fifth step is lysis. In attachment, a virus attaches to a specific receptor site on the host cell membrane through attachment proteins in the capsid. The specificity of this interaction determines the host and the cells within the host that they can be infected by a particular virus. Phage hijacks normal cell porin and has a narrow host range. The next step, penetration. In this stage, genetic material is injected into the bacteria. The sheath acts like a hypodermic needle to get genetic material through the cell wall and the membrane. In the next step, biosynthesis, replication of new phage DNA begins. Production of capsid proteins and other phage proteins are produced. This uses host ribosomes, amino acids, and enzymes. It stops cellular processes and breaks up DNA to use for nucleotides. In the next stage, assembly maturation, viral particles begin to assemble. DNA viruses usually use host cell proteins and enzymes to make additional DNA that is transcribed to messenger RNA. RNA viruses usually use the RNA core as a template for synthesis of viral genomic RNA and mRNA. The viral mRNA directs the host cell to synthesize viral enzymes and capsid proteins and to assemble new virions. Retroviruses such as HIV have an RNA genome that must be reverse transcribed into DNA, which then is incorporated into the host cell genome. So the last part is lysis. This is the release of mature viruses that burst out of the host cell. They are then able to infect adjacent cells and repeat the cycle. Some viruses are released when the host cell dies, while other viruses can leave infected cells by going through the membrane without directly killing the cell. So the next part is the lytic cycle. This explains attachment, which the phage attaches to the surface of the host. Penetration, the viral DNA enters the host cell. Biosynthesis, phage DNA replicates and phage proteins are made. Assembly and maturation, new phage particles are assembled. And lyse, the cell lyses, releasing newly made phages. So the lysogenic cycle is a little different than the lytic cycle. During the lysogenic cycle, instead of killing the host, the phage genome integrates into the bacterial chromosome and becomes part of the host. The integrated phage genome is called a prophage. The phage infects the cell. The phage DNA becomes incorporated into the host genome. Then the cell divides and the prophage DNA is passed on to the daughter cells. Under stressful conditions, the prophage DNA is excised from the bacterial chromosome and enters the lytic cycle. And then, step 5, phage DNA replicates and phage proteins are made. And then the cell lyses. The last step is transduction. Transduction occurs when a bacterial phage transfers bacterial DNA from one bacterium to another during sequential infections. There are two types of transduction, specialized and generalized. Specialized transduction occurs at the end of the lysogenic cycle when the prophage is excised and the bacterial phage enters the lytic cycle. Generalized transduction occurs when the random piece of bacterial chromosomal DNA is transferred by the phage during the lytic cycle. Steps for this include the phage infects the cell, the phage DNA becomes incorporated into the host genome, the phage is then excised from the bacterial chromosome along with a short piece of bacterial DNA. The DNA is then packaged into newly formed capsids. Then the phage contains both viral and bacterial DNA into its host cell. Lastly, the phage DNA along with the attached bacterial DNA are incorporated into the new cell that is produced.
So, influenza. Influenza, or the flu, is a highly contagious respiratory illness caused by the influenza virus. It can cause mild to severe symptoms and sometimes can lead to death. Some who have the flu are susceptible to developing complications that can be life-threatening and, if not properly treated, can cause death. Some of these complications can include ear and sinus infections, all the way to pneumonia, myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart, encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain, or death or damage to muscle fibers. Symptoms and spread. When a person has the flu, symptoms usually come on suddenly, and they often experience fever, cough, sore throat, runny or stuffy nose, muscle or body aches, headaches, fatigue, and some may experience vomiting and diarrhea, though it is more common in children. The flu is spread through air droplets when people cough, sneeze, or talk. The droplets land in the mouths or noses of people who are nearby and get inhaled into their lungs. What makes influenza special? The flu is very hard to predict every year for the vaccine because of the antigenic shift and drift. Antigenic drift is the least severe of the two. This occurs when mutations occur because of the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase makes an error when translating. Antigenic shift is when two or more strains combine into one strain with a mixture of surface antigens. HIV. Human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, is contracted through contact with a person who has the virus. Many times it can lead to AIDS if treatment is not properly maintained.
Alrighty, so some symptoms include, so there are multiple steps to the symptoms. So the first stage is an acute infection, which develops within a month or two of contracting the virus. An acute infection includes fever, headache, muscle aches, joint pain, rash, sore throat, and painful mouth sores, and swollen lymph node glands, and they're mainly on the neck. Many times these symptoms often last for many weeks, and some may be able to notice them. The infection is able to spread more easily due to the amount of pathogen that is in the bloodstream. So next is the clinic latent infection, or the chronic HIV stage. This can sometimes show no signs or symptoms. Other times, persistent swelling of lymph nodes can occur. During this stage, the virus destroys white blood cells and remains in the body. HIV can turn into AIDS, but with the help of antiviral treatments, many people do not develop it. If HIV goes untreated, it can turn into AIDS within 10 years of contracting the virus. AIDS severely damages the immune system and can cause other opportunistic viruses to occur, including cancer. Some symptoms of AIDS include night sweats, reoccurring fever, chronic diarrhea, persistent fatigue, weight loss, rashes on the skin, and persistent white spots or unusual lesions on the tongue or mouth. All of this spreads by unprotected sex with a person who has HIV or AIDS. It spreads from mother to baby, and if used needles are used again by someone with HIV or AIDS. So what makes HIV so special? To be effective, HIV must introduce its genetic material into the cell cytoplasm. Once it penetrates the cellular membrane, it is able to lay dormant or integrate itself into the cell's DNA. Once it is integrated, it goes through replication in the cell. The virus is then spread through the body using budding. So next is the human papilloma virus, or HPV. So this is the most commonly sexually transmitted infection. It usually goes away by itself, but can cause other infections to occur, such as cancer or genital warts. There are more than 200 types of HPV, around 40 of them cause genital warts. It is also found that at least a dozen of types of HPV can sometimes lead to cancer. These types are called high-risk HPV. Cervical cancer is the most commonly linked cancer to HPV. Genital HPV is also common, and most likely everyone who has had sex will contract HPV at some point in their lifetime. So some symptoms of HPV are many times they actually don't show any symptoms. Even people who have contracted high-risk HPV will never show any signs until it becomes a serious problem. One thing that women can do to protect themselves from cervical cancer is getting a regular pap smear. So how is it spread? HPV is a sexually transmitted disease. So some ways to protect yourself against it can include being abstinent, wearing a condom, getting HPV vaccine, and getting HPV and pap tested regularly. Finally, what makes HPV so special? One thing that makes it very different from other viruses is that it is able to lay dormant in the human body until it is triggered. Many times those who have it are unaware that they are even carriers of the infection. We hope this video was very informative, and we hope that you learned something.